Hello and welcome to Global Perspectives. I'm David Dumke here with Katie Coronado. Today we are joined by the Reverend Dr. Gary Mason. Welcome to the show, Dr.
Thank
Mason.
you.
Welcome.
So why don't you tell us a little about the Good Friday Agreement? It's been we were talking before the show about how successful it's been and how actually, is there a fear that this is going to kind of being forgotten by Americans and others?
Yeah, looking back there to the conflict which raged from really 69 to 1998, Northern Ireland is a very, very tiny space. And I often say that to Americans. I mean, population, it's 1.6 million. And over that 30-year period, I mean, we had 47,000 injuries, 36,000 shootings, 22,000 armed robberies, 16,000 bombings, almost 4,000 dead, and 30,000 political prisoners. If I extrapolate those figures into the United States, so very simply put, if my conflict had taken place in your space, you would have had 800,000 dead and 6.4 million political prisoners. By the early 1990s, we had what everyone was really calling a mutually hurting stalemate. So we were really boxed in, knowing there wasn't going to be an ultimate winner, so compromise was the only way to resolve that. And really, Senator George Mitchell, the American Democratic Senator, chaired the talks from 96 right through to April 1998, when finally they got the protagonists over the line.
So Dr. Mason, you're explaining some of the historic parameters of this conflict. It's one thing to come to an agreement, but it's another thing to build the trust that actually implements agreements. So what made this work?
Yeah. I mean, it's a superb question. It was interesting. George Mitchell, when he finally got them over the line, David, his quotation was, if you think getting this deal was difficult, implementing it will be even more difficult. And so as we're having this conversation 21 years later, is all the Good Friday Agreement implemented? The answer is no. The biggest issue haunting Irish society at the moment, apart from Brexit, is actually legacy and dealing with the past, and trying to get a framework around that. It's interesting, in many kind of post-conflict situations, there's a theory that a colleague of mine has developed called Rearview mirror syndrome. So think when you're driving your car, most of us spend sort of 90% of the time looking through the front windshield and just 10% looking through the rearview mirror. In post-conflict situations, 90% of the time is spent looking backwards in the rearview mirror and only 10% looking forward. So really, those kind of ghosts of the past are very much alive and well in Irish society. And the peace process in many ways is still very, very fragile because of that legacy of the past. I mean, it's hopeful that over the next number of years, we'll begin to deal with that. The Good Friday Agreement primarily had three main components. It was weapons decommissioning, reform of policing, and release of prisoners. They didn't deal with legacy, and people have criticised that. Other people would say it was so difficult getting people over the line. If you had introduced a major component on legacy, we may never have got those protagonists over the line in the first place. Interestingly, Tony Blair's Chief of Staff, Jonathan Powell, wrote a book entitled Great Hatred, Little Room, which was really subtext for the hatred was so intense between the two constituencies, there was very little room for negotiation. So the Good Friday Agreement, in many ways, I suppose there are three types of peace, I guess. Sri Lanka, where the government forces sort of crush the Tamil Tigers completely, and you get a peace, but there's no peace agreement. I mean, it comes about by military might. Sure. And I mean, none of your viewers watching today could guarantee any of us sitting around this table that some remnant of the Tamil Tigers will never rise again. None of us know that. The second, I guess, is South Africa, where you kind of get colonial regime change at the top, but really not a lot of difference at the bottom. So economically, I mean, South Africa still is not in good shape, even after the dismantling of apartheid. And really ours is what we call a kind of second preference peace process, where you kind of create a win-win situation for all the protagonists. No one gets everything they want, but they get enough to move their own constituency forward.
And Reverend, you mentioned the rear view mirror element. In a society where, even for us, we have culture, religion ingrained.
Yeah.
How do you address that? And how do you go into what their thoughts have been for so many years and work with that and those differences.
Yeah. There's an interesting question, Katie. I mean, there's a psychological theory that all of us are aware of who are parents or aunts or uncles or grandparents, and it's called kids who carry our pain, which is very much sort of what you and I would call sort of individual therapy in many ways. But if you take that kind of psychological theory and flip it into a kind of national identity or into communities, invariably what happens is we pass the pain down from generation to generation to generation. So the stories are continually told about the other person. So to give you an example, in a sense, I mean, I grew up very much in that sort of British Protestant Unionist loyalist culture. I mean, that was my kind of shaping mechanism as I grew up. And we have all these major parades celebrating ancient historical victories in Ireland. Literally, sometimes it feels every day of the week. And so as a kid, I was taken kind of faithfully to watch the Orange Order marching on the 12th of July, celebrating a battle in 1690. And I remember one very specific, colourful banner of Protestants in a river, up to their necks in water, about to be shoved under and murdered by Catholics. And so as a 6-year-old kid, some of your narrative was, can you really trust those Catholics? They drown Protestants. But the Catholic kid living a mile away also had his banners of Oliver Cromwell, the sort of Lord Protector, sweeping through Ireland, ramming spears through the chests of Catholics. So his narrative became, you can't trust Protestants, they put spears through the chests of Catholics. So how we do history is really, really interesting. And I suppose the Balkans is another classic example. I mean, primarily, the breakup of Yugoslavia, much of it was about battles that took place during the Ottoman Empire, and people were passing the pain from generation to generation to generation. So dealing with the past is so complex. I mean, the New York journalist David Reef wrote a book there a few years ago entitled In Praise of Forgetting, that said, he talks about this, the cult of history, when memory does more harm than good. And he actually does this kind of juxtaposition where he talks about the terror of remembering versus the terror of forgetting. And he quotes an Irish historian who says, humorously, he says, I think we should build a monument to amnesia in Ireland and then forget where we put it, in a sense. So the power of memory is a very strong force post-conflict.
Let me ask you about the power of religion, because you're describing essentially a tribal conflict or two teams with different colors. But religion also gives a very powerful, gives power to a narrative. At the same time, you have been a Methodist minister for 32 years, and leaders of faith were important in this process of peace. So has religion played a very destructive role or constructive role in this, in the Irish context?
Yeah, both good and bad. I mean, there's absolutely no question about it. I mean, too many people in conflict situations assume God is definitely on their side. I mean, there's no question about that. I mean, Jonathan Sacks, the Jewish theologian, says religion has power, exactly as you say, David, and he says whatever has power can be used, misused and abused. So was religion abused in the Irish context? Undoubtedly. I mean, I can remember back kind of late 60s, early 70s, speeches by religious leaders that were just filled with absolute hatred of the other side, demonizing the other side. I mean, one other Jewish theologian used the phrase, it was words, not machines, that created Auschwitz. So how we speak in the public space as religious leaders is really, really important. I mean, Jonathan Sacks again uses the phrase linguistic violence, that language can also move people towards violence, both politically and religiously. I think there were a number of faith leaders in the Irish context did take very strategic risks in speaking to the other and trying to move their constituency forward, and that was really, really important. But under no circumstances would I claim that religion was completely clean in this, because it wasn't. I mean, at times it was absolutely toxic in demonizing the other person.
How do you get both sides to speak with one another? You mentioned your story about when you were 6 and the other little boy, with so many different perspectives that have been ingrained, right, psychologically. So how do you get both sides to speak? It's sort of like a mediator, but people are afraid to speak when there's so many differences that are presented.
Initially, I suppose a lot of what happened there, Katie, would have been what we call kind of single identity work. So it's kind of working with your own constituency and trying to move them or prepare them for dialogue with the other person. So I guess now, having moved on 21 years after the Good Friday Agreement, we have a lot of uncomfortable conversations. And they are very, very difficult. They are painful, there's no question about that. Because there are times when those who have been involved in political violence, and undoubtedly do have blood in their hands, are engaging with people who lost loved ones. And those kind of conversations need facilitated with a lot of skill, there's no question about it, because that legacy is still very, very raw.
Well, let me ask you this. On that note, is it sometimes easier to talk to the other side, if you will, than to talk to those in your own camp that may not be supportive of reconciliation?
Yeah. Brilliant question, David. I did a paper a number of years ago around a kind of Israeli-Palestinian conflict, trying to draw lessons from the Irish conflict. And there's been a lot of research done on what you and I would call negotiations between the enemy tribes, in a sense, but not so much done with your own constituency. And sometimes the most difficult thing is moving your own people forward, because invariably you're betraying your own side, you don't understand your own side.
Right.
So it's trying to get people to see the benefits of compromise and sharing space together and trying to create a new beginning. But undoubtedly, work with your own side is very, very difficult and prone to a lot of pitfalls. There's no question about that. Interestingly, a colleague of mine has a brilliant analogy around how the IRA moved forward, because I mean, we didn't press the fast forward button. The peace process probably began really in the mid 1980s, when republicanism was looking at the arms struggle and the ballot box in the other hand.
Right.
So the phrase was coined by them, the sort of Armalite in one hand and the ballot box in the other. So the key for those involved in republicanism in the IRA was moving them towards politics totally. And a colleague of mine used this brilliant analogy. He said getting the IRA to move away from armed struggle was like going into the highest building in the United States and turning off the lights one switch at a time. It took forever. There were long, long negotiations. So as you say, that intergroup dialogue was absolutely crucial. And the same also applied to those on the loyalist side who were pursuing political violence, because you always had your antagonists. And it was interesting, I mean, one classic example of that, I guess, is when Bill Clinton visited Northern Ireland a number of years ago, sort of mid-90s, to really try to move the process forward. He actually did his keynote address just behind my church, which was on a kind of, concrete wall separating the Catholics and Protestants, and left that meeting, and in his car, which you Americans call the Beast, that sort of cavalcade that he has, drove down the Springfield Road, turned left onto the Falls Road, and coincidentally, Gerry Adams just happened to be coming out of the bakery with his morning scones, and Clinton's car stopped, and he went over publicly and shook Adams' hand. Now, the debate around that, you can imagine, people were saying, what? Here is the leader of the largest democracy on the planet, the leader of the free world, shaking the hand of the spokesperson for the most lethal terrorist organisation in Western Europe. So, I mean, what was President Clinton doing? He was empowering those within the IRA who wanted to move towards politics. Right. So he's really strengthening Gerry Adams' hand in the debate and dialogue with those who wanted to continue the armed struggle. So it was a clever move.
Sure.
How important is it for the people within each side or party to want that change? Because you can't come in as a political leader and say, this is how we're going to do it. How do you gauge that importance?
Yeah. No, it's good, Katie, because really in the early 1990s, when you think, looking back to 1972, which was probably our worst year in a sense, we had a terrorist incident every 40 minutes. Every 40 minutes. So, I mean, that was my childhood. You knew when you went to bed at night, if you heard something on the radio, a Protestant has been killed, you knew by the next day a Catholic would be killed. So really, by the early 1990s, we were war weary. There was no question about that. But what happened was we had a mutually hurting stalemate. So the British were not going to defeat the IRA. The IRA were never going to defeat the British. The loyalist groupings were not going to defeat the IRA. So in that, I think a number of kind of key actors came together, and I think the role of third parties was crucial. So the role of the European Union, putting serious funding into getting communities to dialogue, the role of the United States administration. So that those third parties or other international actors really helped move the process forward. There was also an increasing role for the Irish government as well. So it was almost like a kind of triple lock, working together, trying to move those constituencies forward. But even then, it was still painful and protracted. So in '92, you had the Downing Street Declaration, then you had ceasefires in August '94, October '94, IRA ceasefire breaks down in February '96, more negotiations, and then eventually George Mitchell moves through those talks. And I mean, an interesting story, I know this story because I was told it by someone very close in the talks. And I know when President Clinton rang George Mitchell with the usual, George, there's a job I'd like you to consider. Senator Mitchell's question, obviously, to Bill Clinton was, how long will this take? And Bill Clinton said, I'm guessing 4 months. He was wrong. It took 24 months of protracted negotiations. And I mean, credit to Senator Mitchell. I mean, he spent like hours and hours, weeks, months in those negotiations for 2 solid years.
You're mentioning the role of the United States.
Yeah.
Was it easier for the United States to look at this problem, even though they're not a completely disinterested party, but easier for the U.S. to look at this situation and say, hey, these are two sides that are fighting. The differences aren't as insurmountable as one may think, and they are also united in having economic problems.
Yeah.
There are some commonalities here.
I mean, the role of the United States was excellent. I mean, there was a fund called the International Fund for Ireland as well, and it was primarily American donors were involved in that. And I think more or less $1 billion plus went into building peace from this philanthropist organisation. I think also the role of Irish America as well.
Right.
And I mean, if you look at your space, I mean, you had all the immigration from Ireland, so you had all the sort of the Ulster Scots, who were probably the early pioneers coming down the Appalachians, and then you had that wave of Irish Catholic immigration around the time of the famine. So there was skin in the game for any American politician looking at those sort of two constituencies within the United States, and that undoubtedly played a role. And I think the understanding, I guess, of Irish and British culture, which in many ways is not dissimilar to much that goes on in the United States.
Right.
Can you talk about the perception of the United States and the involvement of the United States with you talked about donors and the people who were here trying to help. What was the perception there of that?
Yeah. I think initially, for many on that sort of British Protestant Unionist loyalist side, there was major suspicion around Irish America. There was absolutely no question about that. I think Bill Clinton, to give him credit, did have an amazing ability to bridge those two sides. Very skilled negotiator, and also George Mitchell there as well, had that ability to understand the British perspective and also understand the Irish perspective. And I think they had that ability to get people into the room. It's interesting, one of the criticisms of George Mitchell initially from some people was, you're indulging these people far too much, they're far too self-opinionated. But actually, in a strange way, looking back on that, I mean, George Mitchell was almost like, he's like a therapist. You know, getting all the junk out on the table. And then when the bad days came, because he built relationships, he was able to push them to make hard decisions. So I think he was very clever in the way he handled
Very
that.
personal.
Yeah, he was. And he said in one of his books, he says, sometimes those folk there are wrapped in a cocoon of naivety. And they were, on the assumption that they were all going to get their own way. But Mitchell very cleverly crafted that Good Friday Agreement, which is classed as a win-win situation for all sides. I mean, going back, David, to what you were originally saying, there was enough from both sides to go out to their constituency to sell it. So people didn't get everything they wanted, but there was enough to get their constituency over the line, which was excellent.
Well, let me fast forward a little. So we're talking about how successful this agreement has been and the process of getting there. Right now, there's a very big issue going on in your neck of the woods, which is the Brexit question. How is this playing in Northern Ireland, and what impact will that have on the Good Friday Agreement staying in place?
I mean, there's major concern from all sides about how this spills out. There's no question about it. If we were having this conversation 3 or 4 years ago, you and I would be saying, British-Irish relationships are the best they've been in 100 years. They're now the worst they have been in the last 25 to 30 years, and primarily Brexit is to blame with that. In many ways, I mean, the key of the Good Friday Agreement was really softening the border between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland. But with all the complexities around trade and tariffs, there is going to have to be some checks, because the Republic of Ireland stays as part of the economic European Union. Northern Ireland comes out of it. So goods can't just transfer from Northern Ireland into the EU without some form of checks. The difficulty is checks could mean security, and one of the main issues was a very heavy securitised border during the conflict. So that's one of the major concerns. The Good Friday Agreement as well, also as regards identity, allowed them people in the northern part of Ireland to designate themselves as British or as Irish. And those from the kind of Irish nationalist Catholic perspective see Brexit as really with a very pro-strong British agenda, minimising their Irish identity. So, it's a very fragile time. Will there be a deal? Will there not be a deal? So it's all the uncertainty that has created so much complexity. So there's concern on both sides that, the Good Friday Agreement was a masterpiece in political compromise, but we still have a fragile peace process. We're dealing with centuries of debris, of history, of toxic religion, so it really needs to be handled very skillfully over the next while, because Northern Ireland is different, despite what some people try to say. We're a different space than the London or Birmingham or Glasgow. We're just coming out of a 30-year civil war, and the memories are raw.
Sure.
A lot of these instances can be related or compared to places all over the world, even here in the United States. What can we take? What's our takeaway here, if, coming from you with all this extra expertise, what would you say?
I often say, as I look at the United States, obviously some of your debates and language in the public space at the moment, it's no state secret, it's not healthy. How do people disagree well? I remember reading an article actually in Florida a number of years ago for a Methodist sort of a newsletter addressing the question, how do people disagree well? And I think one of the lessons from the Irish peace process is that when people do disagree politically, not to continually demonise the other person. And I suppose looking at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where I do work in there as well, some of the lessons from our peace process are valid in that space. So there's no way the Good Friday Agreement is a blueprint for the Middle East, but there are certain concepts of it that really have profound impacts on our space and on other spaces. Some of those lessons, looking at the Middle East, political leadership was absolutely essential in getting us over the line. So the role of Bill Clinton, George Mitchell, Tony Blair, Bertie Ahern, and compromising was absolutely crucial. So the questions often asked, is Israeli and Palestinian leadership willing to compromise, to do a deal? That's up for debate. Second thing, the whole concept of security, which is very much part of the world or in the Middle East. And we found we only got real lasting security when we dealt with the root causes of the conflict. The role of civic society. So politicians, in many, many ways, do the deal, but sometimes politicians assume naively that once the deal is done, societal healing automatically follows.
Sure.
And in reality, nothing could be further from the truth. So you need civic society. So actually you need academics, you need universities, you need women's groups, you need religious leaders to really be the kind of social glue that holds that peace process together. Another phrase both Israelis and Palestinians often use to me is, oh Gary, you don't understand, we don't have a partner for peace. And sure. I assure both Israelis and Palestinians, I said, trust me, in the early days of those negotiations and conversations, we also believed there was no partner, there was no trust on the other side. So in reality, trust only comes about in the context of a relationship. And that was absolutely key.
We're running low on time, but I wanted to ask a quick question, which is, in the Israeli-Palestinian context, if you look at polls from both Israelis and Palestinians, the people want peace. And it's often the leaders that have not been able to get together and finish it. Was that the same situation in Northern Ireland, or is each situation different? Are people more ready for peace than leaders?
Interesting concept, actually, David, because, despite the violence that took place in our space and many people that went to prison, many prisoners did play a significant role in moving their constituencies forward. So in many ways it was people on the ground pressurising politicians. I mean, politicians by nature, as we all know, sometimes don't do compromise very well. So there were grassroots movements putting pressure on politicians to do the deal.
Can you go back to the trust and the relationship building and how important that is from within?
To quote another theologian who once said, dehumanization precedes genocide. So if you don't know a human being in the battlefield or in any space, it's much easier to dismiss them or even kill them. So relationships and trust are so, so important. I mean, there's a phrase back home there, Katie, we often use called peace comes dropping slowly. So negotiations and peace building, it's a long, protracted process, but building that human relationship actually makes a difference, and understanding why did that other person make those choices is absolutely crucial.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time.
Dr. Mason, you're a psychologist and a minister ideally suited for peace process. I want to thank you for joining us today. And I want to thank you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you soon on the next episode of Global Perspectives.